and welcome to On Your Mark, or On the Mark, the Alaska-specific webinar on EPA 104 MARC grants. I'm Joy, as some of you guys know, along with Bailey Richards from the ANTHC Contamination Support Program. We're one of the Alaska TRPs. And we are happy to be a part of the team that brings you today's webinar. So I'll go over some quick housekeeping before we jump into the webinar. We ask that you please keep all your computer and phone lines muted during the webinar. We will have a question and answer session at the end of the webinar and really hope you came prepared with some questions. The chat function is being monitored, so please feel free to use that to write any questions that come to mind during the presentation. The webinar will be recorded, as Richard asked, and will be posted on the Tribal Brownfields Forum. We hope that all of you are a part of the Tribal Brownfield Forum. If that is something that you're not a part of yet, we will send you a link to become a part of that. And it will also be posted on the ANTHC website and probably on CClear and KSUs as well. So we'll send an email where all the recordings and the PDF of the presentation will be posted. If you're calling in and do not have access to view via Zoom, view the webinar via Zoom, we'll try our best to name the page numbers of the PowerPoint slides for you to follow along. So, let's see. Ooh. Now, how do I? Okay. So I want to introduce our speakers today, which you'll see here momentarily. But Mickey Hartnett is the co-director of Kansas State University's Tribal Technical Assistance to Brownfields. It's called KSU Tribal Tab. Tribal Tab provides technical assistance to tribes and tribal communities on 128A tribal response programs and other brownfields issues. He served as a tribal circuit rider for the US EPA Region 8 from 2004 to 2014. And providing technical assistance and training to tribes for tribal response programs, brownfield, solid waste, and emergency response. His prior experience includes 25 years with the US EPA in hazardous waste, Superfund, and brownfields programs. Next, we have Ignacio De Reach. Ignacio has over 30 years of experience in the public sector development, including grant writing, fiscal and financial analysis, public debt financing, feasibility analyses, community outreach and participation, and urban design. With CClear, he has assisted communities throughout the Western United States to obtain state and federal grants and technical assistance. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and send it over to Ignacio to start the webinar. And I will ask that we also stop sharing our video screens. As much as I love seeing your beautiful face, Brandy, we're going to just stop it for a little bit. And I'll hand it over to Ignacio.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Yes, yes.
Hello.
Hi. Yes, so apologies, I wasn't prepared to do this. I thought I was going to be running off Joy's screen, but I'm just pulling that off. But while I'm looking, welcome all, and maybe just a bit about the tab, the grants that were just awarded yesterday. There were $65.6 million in grants awarded just yesterday. And there you go. Is that me? I guess that's me. I have two computers going on here, so I am going to run my slideshow now. All right, there we go. So first, a disclaimer: K-State is is in partnership with CClear and ANTHC. We help out in the tribal technical assistance to brownfields, and it's paid out of a grant from the EPA to Kansas State University. Now, Tribal Tab What is it? Well, most of you are probably aware, but for those of you who are not in the network right now, Tribal Tab is a special program of the EPA to provide technical assistance to all tribes in the United States. And there's in particular for Alaska, ANTHC are there people on the ground in Alaska, and they provide through their contamination support program. And I'm sure Joy and Bailey can chime in a bit later. You can, if you have any more questions about that, you can put it. We can discuss it during Q&A. So, what's the purpose of the webinar? First, what's our EPA 104K, or what we call very often the MARC Brownfields grants? Who's eligible for it? What's the difference between a 104K and the STRP, or the 128A grant program? And why are partnerships needed between the two? And how a 128 tribe can work with a 104K grant or applicant, and what the next steps are if after you hear all this presentation, as well as reviewing the slides from last week on the MARC grants, if you want to investigate it further. So what are EPA 104K MARC Brownfields grants? And let's see if, I'm sure Mickey, if you're unmuted, please feel free to chime in anytime. So I will start with a multiple choice question. A brownfield is it a contaminated site? Yeah, maybe. Is it in the EPA, state, or DEC database? Could be. Is it any site? And I'll explain those asterisks later. Or redevelopment with potential contamination or liability. And by liability, we mean environmental liability. Yes, that's what brownfields are about. And our goal here at Tribal Tab is to help communities and tribes, cities, states use federal, state, and local tools, including MARC grants, for reuse. So when we say any site, there are a lot of eligibility requirements. The devil is always in the details. And in this case, the details is another webinar in itself. So we won't go into that. That's something for you to ask during the Q&A or in the near future. So here's a brief overview of what happened last week during the MARC grant webinars. The speakers, I was privileged enough to join it, spoke about multipurpose grants, assessment grants, revolving loan fund grants, and revolving loan fund grants are not offered this year, but we talked about that too, and cleanup grants. So go to that link. If you haven't viewed it, view it, and feel free to go back. And the ksutab.org website has a lot of other webinars, recordings from past presentations and future webinars coming up on actually working on a grant. So if after you view this webinar and you're even more interested, then tune in and visit that website for other recordings. But basically, we are doing this specially for Alaska tribes because eligibility is a key consideration for STRPs and tribes to participate in these grants. So eligible entities include federally recognized tribes, with the exception of in Alaska, government entities such as states, counties, boroughs, municipalities, cities, or towns, quasi-governmental entities. So if it's a .org in their email address, or if they're a 501c3, they are eligible, and nonprofits. So those are, in a snapshot, the eligible entities. So who are and are not? So I'm going to go deeper into this. When we say federally recognized tribes, in Alaska, only the Metlakatla Indian community is eligible. And the exclusion of Alaska tribes from Brownfield Grant eligibility is statutory. So, that's not the EPA staff doing this. It has to do with ANTHC, and which was entered into way before some of you were born. So they didn't foresee the Brownfields program at all, and what we're trying to do here is a workaround so we can have Alaska tribes and TRPs benefit from participating in the program. So again, governmental entities are eligible, and quasi-governmental and nonprofits. And in Alaska, ANTHC village and regional corporations are eligible. So again, visually, who are these? Here are a few examples of eligible entities in Alaska. So cities and towns, and the boroughs, the map on top are the boroughs in Alaska. School districts are eligible. ARDers, which are Alaska Regional Development Organizations. And that's the map in the bottom. And Economic Development Administration grantees typically are eligible, and you can see who the members are in Alaska. And I just mentioned a few here. That's not a complete list, but some of you folks are calling in from these organizations, I think. So those are your eligible entities. Now let's shift to the MARC, the 104K grants. What are the roles? So these entities and roles, what do they have to do with the MARC grant, and what do they do? So again, you have an applicant or a grantee. So a grantee, of course, you apply, and then if you are offered the grant, you become a grantee. Now, some eligible entities do not want to be a grantee, but they want to be in on the action. And if they're an eligible entity but do not want the headache of managing a grant, and their program kind of matches up with another applicant, they can join in as a coalition member or a coalition partner. Remember, coalition members or coalition partners have to be eligible. Now they're partners or community partner. A partner or community partner is a member of the community, can be a nonprofit, can be an eligible entity, can be a non-eligible entity, but this is a partner who can help implement the grant program. So they might not be a formal member, but if they want to help out, they can. And there are many examples, such as, you got chambers of commerce, Main Street organizations, neighborhood groups, churches. Those are examples of community members, community partners that have participated in Brownfields MARC grants. And then there's a stakeholder. A stakeholder is a person who could be affected by the implementation of a grant. That any person who in the community might have an interest, might be a business person or a resident that may or may not benefit from a Brownfield grant in their community, might want to provide feedback, so they're a bit more removed, but we want to know who the stakeholders are so that we can design a grant that benefits them as well. and a sub-grantee. Now, sub-grantee is another eligible entity that can get pass-through funds from the grantee. There are not very many of these, but an eligible entity can get a sub-grant from a grantee. And then there are consultants. Consultants are those that have to be selected through a federal process. They are typically paid. Some consultants provide free work, but generally consultants are paid. So those are the roles in the MARC grant. So what's the difference between a 104K and a 128A Brownfield grant? And I think, Mickey, this is where you come in, right?
Yeah, thank you, Ignacio. And I want to thank Ignacio, Joy, and Bailey for putting together our virtual gathering here today. I look forward to when we can all meet face-to-face again, but in this era, we'll do this in the meantime. But thanks for the information Ignacio provided, and I want to take it over into the 128A universe with those grants, also known as Cooperative Agreements, which many of the tribes or consortiums of tribes have. And really the goal of that program is to create a long-term capacity building for dealing with brownfields and releases of hazardous substances, contaminants with the tribes. And the tribes are eligible for these grants. And, you know, for those of you that have it, you're familiar with this terminology. The grant is to establish or enhance tribal response program or brownfield program, and progressively from year to year take reasonable steps to work on the 4 elements addressed in the program. I won't go into those right now, but you know, we have whole training sessions even on the website about all the elements. And requirement to establish and maintain a public record, and this is one of the areas where it could, you know, overlap with what other people are doing, the eligible entities for a 104 grant, for instance, to keep, you know, whether it's ADEC or another federal agency or a 104 grantee, a public record can be inclusive of all their activities, so everybody knows what everybody's doing. And basically to increase the capacity of the tribe to, you know, identify brownfield sites, and for those who are identified, look at processes to get them assessed and cleaned up and redeveloped. Next slide. Ding. So for those of you that, you know, have these grants, or some of you may still be interested in them, one of the big differences are, you know, as different from what Ignacio talked about, the federally recognized tribes in Alaska and consortiums of those tribes are eligible for the 128A grants. They're not a competitive grant process like the 104s are. And they can go from year to year as the program evolves. And it's, like I mentioned, to develop that long-term capacity of the tribe and the environmental program. And one of the key differences is the 104 grants are very project-specific or site-specific on a particular project to redevelop cleanup effort, whereas the 128A is looking at the long-term development of an overall program. And of course, an important difference, like Ignacio mentioned, there's a big difference in the money. The 104 grants are a source for a significant amount of funds to address a specific site for assessment and cleanup and redevelopment, whereas the 128A program is mainly to help support that tribal program development, but typically does not have enough funds for any major assessment or cleanup efforts for a specific site. Next slide. So, you know, why would you want to partner with an eligible entity that are seeking to, or maybe fortunate to get one of the 104K competitive grants? And I know the last ATCM conference last year, I had a number of tribal people ask me that question. You know, why would we want to partner with them? And if we do, how can we do that? So we want to talk about that a little today, that even though the tribes themselves are not eligible for the 104K grants, with the exception of Metlakatla, they may want to cooperate with or work with those that are eligible for those grants. And that's all the entities that Ignacio talked about and showed on those pictures. And you may be aware of some of those entities have already, thought about or even talked about planning to apply for a 104 grant this next grant cycle, which is going to happen a little earlier this next year, by the way. So there are things that the tribal response programs and other tribes can do to participate as project partners, and in this case, the word partners with a small P, not a capital P. There are differences in what type of partners there are, like Ignacio mentioned. So what I want to do is maybe answer the question of what can a tribal response program who is developing their long-term program do to act as a partner with an eligible grant activity for a MARC grant. And typically it'll be next fall, but we're hearing that that could be as early as August or September this year. So, keep your eyes open for that, or any entities that are seeking to apply for those grants. It's going to be earlier than previous years. So as mentioned, the terminology gets a bit bureaucratic, and it can be important to know the difference between a quote-unquote coalition member or coalition partner with capital letters versus just a capital, a partner with a small p, because I think the tribes of the 128A program can be a very valuable partner to those eligible entities. They have knowledge and skills and information that they can share with those applicants, as well as assisting them with implementing a grant if they're fortunate enough to get one. However, I want to caution that for those of you that do have a 128A grant, make sure you're talking to and coordinating with your EPA grant project officer so that your grant work plan is in sync with, the work you're doing or plan to do, and especially if that evolves or changes. And also, if there's any overlap of grant funding, that's where you don't want to create a perception of, what grant is paying for what or getting any problem areas there. And that's a whole discussion in itself, but just keep in contact with your project officer. If you have any questions, ask them to keep, everything on the up and up, or not even create the appearance of a, problem or duplication of effort from a grant standpoint. Next slide, please. So what kind of things can you do to assist a 104 applicant or a grantee? And that's two different things, but it can be similar. But there are things you can help with as far as an applicant putting together a proposal to apply for one of these competitive grants. And then if they're awarded one of these grants, then how can you continue to assist them in implementing that grant? Next slide. So first, we'll look at it from the application standpoint. As I mentioned before, these are extremely competitive grants. There's a lot of information gathering has to go on to put together a really good competitive proposal. And a lot of that knowledge is information, and information are things that the tribes that are doing work under 128A grants may have some of that information, may already have an inventory of known brownfield sites. They may know what sites have had assessments conducted on them or plan to be conducted, and who did them, and maybe even have copies of those assessment reports. They may know the history of some of these areas and sites, and that means, knowledge of tribal members and people and community members that live in and around these sites. They know a lot about the history of them. They can go into a proposal. And of course, what they know in terms of their coordinating with ADAC and other federal agencies, what they've been doing. And of course, those agencies have their own knowledge and reports and inventories. And sometimes it's just knowledge of things that have happened in an area. It may not be known sites, but just history of where things may have been released, or spills or accidents. And if it's in an area that they're seeking to redevelop, they may need to know about those things. So being able to share community knowledge and knowledge of the environment and the impact on these sites and what the best potentials are for redevelopment can be valuable assistance. Next slide, please. But then if you leap ahead, and if the eligible applicant is fortunate enough to be awarded one of these 4K grants, then that's when, you know, the work really starts. So really get into the redevelopment, reuse planning. There's a lot of input they could seek on helping with that. There's technical work to do, both in planning, assessments and cleanups, and reviewing work plans, reviewing reports and data that the tribe may have, you know, some knowledge and skills already to be helpful in doing that. Establishing cleanup goals that are specific to an area and a site in the community that meets the goals of important in that particular location. Sometimes there's field oversight work that's needed. The contractors sometimes need to have contact with local people or local community members or programs, be out there with the contractors, assisting and overseeing what they're doing. That can also provide assistance with oversight while hiring and selecting the contractors, which ones are the best fit for a project. Institutional controls is an element of the 128A program. And what that really means is local governmental control, whether that's state, borough, community, or even tribal control of a specific area or site, particularly if there's some known or suspected contamination, and that site needs to be controlled until it is finally cleaned up, or the use of that or access to an area. And that's where a tribe can be, you know, instrumental and helpful in implementing such controls, even if it's not into the tribe's jurisdiction, but somebody else's jurisdiction. The fact that they're physically living there means they could maybe help somebody in that area. One of the elements of the 128A program, particularly element 3, has to do with community outreach, information, and seeking community input. And since they're already doing that, that can be very helpful to a 104 grantee. And as I mentioned before, the public record can be a way to share what all entities are doing to assess and clean up sites, not just what's being done under 128A, but even under other programs or 104 grants. So there's a lot here that overlaps with the 4 elements where the tribes can be very helpful and coordinate their efforts. Next slide. So, and as Ignacio mentioned, you know, it kind of gets to next steps. You know, who are the eligible entities? Of those eligible entities, which ones may be looking at or interested in applying for those 104 grants? Who could the potential partners and stakeholders be? How can they work together? Who has the knowledge, skills, and ability to help with what? And who has what information? And how can those efforts be coordinated or combined to, you know, achieve mutual goals? There's a lot of things you see in this slide, but I think it's a matter of identifying who wants to move forward on these things and what are the next steps, who can help who with what. Next slide, please. So it kind of gets to the point of who are all the contacts, and I'll just speak for KSU tab. You know, there's myself and Scott Nightingale, who's also on the webinar today. Blaise Levens, our, you know, head guru with Kansas State. And of course, we work with ANTHC, Joanne Bailey, and Ignacio is a very valuable contact, especially with the 104 grant process and economic development. So at this point, I'd like to turn it back over to Joy and see if you want to take it from here, Joy.
Great, thank you, Mickey and Ignacio, and thank you for advancing that slide, Ignacio. We also want to thank and recognize our EPA contacts for the MARC grants. We have on the phone and on this webinar today, Terry Griffith and Madison Sanders Curry. If you have any questions at all about the MARC grants, these are the two at the EPA who will be able to answer those questions if you can't get the answers from our tribal tab team. So please contact us first and we'll be happy to help you. And then Terry and Madison would be the absolute contacts for that. Can you advance the slide, Ignacio? All right, so now is the time that we just want to thank you. It's 11:34, so we went through the webinar fairly quickly as a recap, and we really want to hear from you, Alaska Tribal Response Program coordinators, with any questions that you might have. Feel free to unmute your video so we could see your faces. And take this time to ask our experts on the line questions. We have Mary Gooley also who called in, and we all know she knows everything. So we're so grateful that she's on the line as well. And feel free to ask any questions at all. Anyone else? Anyone have anything to ask?
Well, while people are thinking, and I know, Joy, you had some other questions that you have there in your back pocket. So as I'd mentioned in the start, the EPA just announced the MARC awardees yesterday. Unfortunately, no one from Alaska got awarded this round, though there are successful MARC grantees from past years in Alaska. The kind of partnership we're suggesting here has never been done before. And that's why we're reaching out early, so that any STRPs or tribes that do think they have some brownfields that they want to work with, we have to find basically matchmake with a eligible entity, because we have to kind of gang up in them and kind of make them apply, or at least help them apply. And so it's an additional, I guess, challenge for your communities. And that's why we're starting early.
I wanted to add something too, Joy. This is Mickey. One thing we didn't go into in a lot of detail because of time limits, but it's also important to know that if somebody's thinking about applying for a 104K grant, one of the first things you have to look at is the particular site you want to work on, or sites, are they eligible for 104 funding? And there's a specific criteria in the EPA grant guidelines as to what sites are eligible for that kind of funding. And that can get a little confusing or a little bureaucratic to some folks, and it is. So if you have any questions about site eligibility, I would definitely talk to EPA folks as early as possible so they can go through the matrix of questions to determine whether a site's even eligible, so you don't pursue trying to draft a 104 grant application or proposal for a site that's not even eligible.
Terry or Madison, our EPA contacts, do you have anything that you'd like to add that maybe we have missed, or that you'd like to go into more detail about?
If you can hear us, can you hear me, Joy?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I don't have my headset on, so I wasn't sure. This is Terry Griffith with EPA Review from Brownfield. And I just want to reiterate, highlight what Mickey just said about making sure to contact us early about eligibility. There's lots of confusing pieces to it. And so we just want to make sure we know these applications are a lot of labor, maybe hopefully a labor of love. But we want to make sure that you have all the assistance you need from us when you complete those applications or when you're getting, working with your partners to assist them. So yeah, just feel free to reach out anytime. Madison and I are available for questions. We can sit down with you and, if you're working with a corporation and run through all the variables and kind of strategize the best way to move forward. And especially if you're dealing with a site-specific application, a cleanup, or a site-specific assessment, we can run through all of that. And sometimes we even need to get our Brownfields attorney involved so that she can weigh in. So yeah, we're here to help. So feel free to reach out early because it can be a lot of legwork.
Hi, Joy, this is Mary.
Hi, Mary.
Hi, good morning. I wanted to check in on partnerships. I know there was a slide about small p, large p. I like how you said that, Mickey. Official partner and not official partner. And just wanted to also check in because I think is Carrie joined us from Native Village of Eklutna. Do I see you, Carrie? Or I saw you, Carrie, Brownfield? Just in that I thought there was a little bit of a partnership with Native Village of Eklutna with Anchorage, with the municipality of Anchorage, that they have worked together, but I don't think an official applicant partner. So we do have some example of that happening, I think, and Carrie can probably let us know if that's true or not. But so that might be someone that you could reach out to. And then with Kodiak's assessment, competitive assessment, they have worked with corporation, but not with federally recognized tribe, and have not worked with a tribal response program. But natives of Kodiak, and then possibly even Shunak. But I'm scrolling through, and I'm not a Zoom expert. I mean, we were using Skype before this all happened, and we're trying to learn Teams, and then I've been doing Zoom with family. I don't know. My 85-year-old mother loaded the app. It worked out well. Let me see. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And, that'll be discussion. You'll have time before the application period happens in the fall, and to reach out to each other. You always have that contact spreadsheet that we share across the region for other TRP coordinators, and you can reach out to each other or use the Brownfield forum that we luckily have through ANTHC and our KSU partners with Tribal Tab, and start throwing questions out there on how to work with eligible entities. So I just wanted to add that in, and boy, I'm looking at myself on the screen. I so need a trim. Anyway, I'm just gonna say it. I tried to trim my own bangs and my daughters told me to stop. So I'm living the dream.
You're perfect, Mary.
Thanks, Jacqueline.
It looks good, Mary.
Thanks, Derek. So anyway, I'm just glad that we've had that opportunity with C-Clear, ANTHC, KSU, Ignacio, and Mickey, and Scott. Thanks for joining from KSU. And of course, Joy and Bailey really emphasizing being a fellow TRP, but also being that partner with KSU and the Tribal Tab. So hopefully we'll just have more collaboration with this MARC funding to try and get some of the funds into Alaska. That would be exciting.
Yes.
That's it from me.
Thank you, Mary. Thanks.
I guess I have a question for at the ATCAM, Mickey. What kind of questions were you getting?
Well, questions like we addressed today, in that, can a 128A tribe work with the corporation if the corporation is in a CEQA 104 grant? And questions in 104 you know, and usually it's like administrators or attorney types at this point, you know, are they eligible, and, you know, what can the tribe do to help them? And of course, there's bureaucratic issues when you start talking about two different grants and crossing the lines of who's funding who to do what. And they recognize that that's, you know, potential problem you want to avoid. And it's like you said, devil's in the details, but I think there's a lot of potential for, you know, the 128A grantees to work with, you know, the native corporations or even some of the other governmental entities who will be seeking a 104 proposal, because they probably working on sites or seeking to work on sites that are of, you know, interest to the tribe or affects their community and their environment. So there's a lot of potential there for, you know, addressing mutual concerns and figuring out within their different grant programs how they can help each other. And people ask, you know, those kind of general questions, and that kind of led to realizing we need to do something like we're doing today. We actually had planned to do something like this at the next ACM conference, but of course that's not going to be very timely with the grant cycle. So this is the time of year we need to be trying to answer those questions and letting people know we're available out here, all of us that we've mentioned, that as they start looking towards doing something like this with the Native Corporation or anybody else, questions are going to come up and we'll help answer them. But obviously the 104 grant program is a valuable source of funds to address some sites that may not otherwise be getting looked at or cleaned up. And I think Alaska does have a number of unique situations when it comes to site eligibility. So the sooner folks start focusing on those sites, and we can start figuring those things out, and that'll help decide who can help who do what. So not a lot of specific questions at the ACM, but just general questions of, you know, can we work together? How can we help each other do what?
Yeah, and actually, again, question for, I guess, the TRPs is, do you have sites that aren't getting assessed or cleaned up because you don't have enough funds? Maybe you can raise your hands if you don't, you know, if you're shy about speaking up, but now is the time to address those. This is your chance, because you're not going to get, you know, you might get it from a DBAC. So if you can get it through a DBAC, then fine. But if the DBAC is not enough, or you need cleanup, then this is probably your one of the best ways of getting it. It's hard work, but it only comes around, this chance only comes out once a year. So now is not the time to be shy.
So we do have some comments on the chat. No real questions, but I see some positive comments from Jacqueline and Carrie Ann, where seeing the potential for partnership with ANTHC Village and regional corporations is there, as and other eligible entities. So that's really good. We hope that this webinar has shed some light on how you can reach out to eligible entities as TRP coordinators and stir up some of that excitement for these opportunities, and to also remind ANTHC Village and regional corporations of the BUILD Act that removes liability of these corporations on ANTHC conveyed lands that have been contaminated pre-ANTHC. So there are opportunities to talk and reach across the board to your eligible entities and really try to make these grants happen. I know one of the questions we get are how can consultants help write these applications? Maybe Ignacio, you can talk a little bit about that, not just maybe about consultants, but how CClear and KSU can assist in reviewing these type of grant applications.
Yeah, so just go a bit and we covered this a little during those webinars last week. there are several ways you can get started. One way is, again, look at what the guidelines look like, and if you logged in and created an account under tab EZ, which you can access through the KSU website, tab EZ really walks you through a grant application, and it's like an essay exam. There are like, I don't know, 20, many questions that you kind of fill out, and you just kind of keep answering them. And you can download this into Word, or you could go to the database, a repository of successful past grants, and use it as a model for your own situation. So some people, you know, they work better when they're actually kind of being guided by an existing document, so that you can do that too. So that's one, those are kind of two ways to get started. Another way, and you can direct your eligible entity to those resources too. Another way, after you've done your draft, is to send it to CClear, and we review these for free. We don't write them, but we will review them until, you know, our eyes are bleary. So, because we want you to be successful. And during this last grant cycle, there are many applicants that we thought were kind of lost causes. But after working with them, they actually did receive grants. So it's not impossible if you start early. Another way is to work with a consultant. Now, there are consultants who are willing to work for free or be paid. Now, a grant, you can't pay them out of EPA funds to write a grant application, so you'll have to find other funds to have a consultant write a grant for you. Or some consultants will kind of do it, you know, on spec, but you have to procure them under the federal process, so that they're assured that you can work with them if and when you receive a grant. So those are other ways, and I know this is a lot of information, and it takes a lot to convince an eligible entities that you may not have worked with before to apply for a grant. So one of the things that we didn't jump the gun on this because we didn't know if it was necessary, but we can put together another webinar for those eligible entities that you might invite or might be curious in applying for a grant. Because we know it's hard for you to talk about something that you haven't done before. So we can do that for you, but we need you to find those eligible entities so that we can both gang up on them and try to convince them to at least watch a webinar to see if this is something they're willing to do.
Thanks, Ignacio.
Like,
Helen, oh, I'm sorry, Terry, did you want to add to that?
Oh, yeah, I actually wanted to just say a couple of things too, now that you open the door, Joy. So just a couple of things I want to highlight that maybe weren't mentioned before. So some of the, there are some consortia that are eligible as nonprofits. And nonprofits are now eligible for assessment grants, and they have been eligible for cleanup grants all along. And then this coming year, we'll also have the multi-purpose grant, which is a combination of assessment, cleanup, and planning. So just wanted to mention that, and so that's why it's important if you are considering or assisting an entity that's considering to come in and make sure that to come talk with EPA, make sure that your potential applicant is eligible and that also the site is eligible. And then one of the things we also wanted to highlight from our EPA Region 10 Brownfields team is one of the most essential pieces of the application process is to highlight potential reuse for your property. So you, in addition to coming in for assessment or cleanup, really need to be thinking of the big picture of, you know, moving from the starting point to the end point, which is the reuse or redevelopment of the property. And it can be anything from an open space, it can be, you know, subsistence areas or gathering areas for the tribe. It could be a community center, it could be economic development of something, mixed use development, depending on where you're at, housing. So there's all kinds of ways that you can reuse the properties. So be thinking about that, but it's really critical because that is going to be something that you're going to be evaluated against. And so be thinking about that bigger picture. And I noticed that earlier Mickey was highlighting that kind of, that's something that the TRPs can work with eligible entities on kind of visioning. That's part of the community visioning work that you can do as well. So just wanted to highlight those things. Thanks, Joy.
Thanks, Terry. That's great. Do we have any other comments or questions?
Yeah, there's some comments on the chat, Joy. Have you seen it? They're like 4, they're mostly comments, but.
Helen had a question.
Yeah, I'm Helen, and I'm not sure if it's, I feel like I missed a couple things, but the thing with being partners, I know for here in Sitka, our tribe and corporation have not gotten along. Like, hopefully things might be changing, but it's such that they forbid anyone employed with the tribe to be on the corporation board. So we really don't get along and can't really partner with them. There's possibly other organizations, but I guess I'm a little unclear, like, if we really wanted to get this money and could find an organization to partner with, like how that would work. So we can't be like full-on partners? Is that what I got from this?
Yes, so yeah, let me answer that. You won't be a coalition partner, but you can participate as a project partner. So you could do work, especially if it's covered under your 128 to implement the grant. And that partner can be in another part of the state. Hopefully it's not, you know, way far away. There's got to be some connection. And there also you have to also prove that, to show that if they do work in your community, that you know, there's a regulatory side that's being taken care of, and if that becomes an issue, I mean, there are many things in the application that will probably raise flags for you. So I suggest you go over in the application and see, okay, pretend that you're a partner in a grant that someone else is writing, and pretend that eligible entity is somewhere else in the state, and how that might apply to you and how you can participate. But the goal there is for them to get the grant and to use part of those grants, that grant, to do site assessments or other planning in your community.
This is Terry. I just wanted to add on, just to clarify, Helen, it is confusing because we use terms interchangeably, partner and member and all of that. So when we talk about the coalition, we're talking about the assessment coalition, a coalition of, we call them partners, sometimes members, or so typically in EPA grants, when you're dealing with a coalition membership, you all have to be eligible entities. So if it were a tribe in Alaska that's not eligible, then you could be a project partner, like Ignacio was explaining, but you couldn't actually be one of the coalition members. So you know, there's that kind of difference. So we try to start using the term member for coalition and then partner for project partner. But I think that sometimes we use those terms interchangeably. So hopefully we'll get those straight and start using the same thing to describe, but feel free to reach out if something's confusing on that.
Can I add something? This is Mary. And I also want to just say, I'm going to have to get off the call. Terry is offered to stay on the call. We also have our branch call starting in about a couple of minutes. So I'm going to head off, but Terry and Madison, I think, are going to stay on. Helen, I know that Sitka isn't the only tribe that may not have a relationship with their correlating village corporation. There are others, and also, you know, there's consortia, the nonprofit consortia versus a regional corporation, that there may not always be that communication. So we understand that, and so if your tribe is open to the idea of, you know, not being a board member on the village corporation, but to be able to provide some outreach, if there's a chance where you could get on their next village corporation meeting agenda, or, you know, maybe branch out and go to your regional corporation and to get on the meeting agenda to provide outreach on Brownfield, what your program's doing, but also to talk about this opportunity for the competitive funding. And I know we have examples, both Native Village of Port Haydn, and then also BB&A Consortia have reached out to BB&C, the regional corporation, and have gotten on their agendas and provided information. I think Cassandra had regularly attended BB&C regional corporation meetings to provide outreach on Brownfield. So, you know, there's, you know, it's that attempt to try and bridge that relationship, and you may not be able to do that, but that's some eligible work that can be done under your TRP, is reaching out to eligible entities. And even though your TRP, your tribe is not eligible for these funds, is working with those eligible entities. So that's just some ideas to start out with. And I know we've talked about them before, but it's, you know, maybe third try is the charm, you know, third time you say, hey, can I get on the agenda? Or maybe it's a new chair. If you're not having any luck now, just wait till elections and go in the next 6 months and try and get on a meeting agenda. So just wanted to add that, but thank you all. Good to see everybody, but I'm gonna have to figure out how to get off of this call. And
Thanks, Mary.
Thanks,
yeah,
Mary.
thank you.
It's at the
Bye.
very bottom. There's leave meeting on the bottom right.
Oh my gosh, thank you, Joy Britt. Okay,
No
bye
problem.
guys.
Thanks, Mary. And I also
Thank
want
you.
to add to Mary's comment. I have two examples in my mind of like the Native or the Kassan tribe did a great job in putting outreach to their corporation and their city on their deliverables, and invited ANTHC to go out, and ANTHC and DEC. So Bailey and Lisa went out to Kassan to do some outreach and training on Brownfields. And though Patty had to jump off the webinar, I'm going to use her in Chewathpiluk as an example of also putting together a community visioning meeting that she reached out to Tribal Tab for assistance with that. Unfortunately, did not get to happen due to COVID, but she had that in her work plan to reach out to these eligible entities as well. So it's a great example of putting things in your work plan and utilizing your tab and your other peers for assistance. We can definitely come out and help. We can help you together your PowerPoint presentations and do anything that can help bridge the lines of communication for these eligible entities.
Joy, I wanted to mention something. This is Mickey. You know, the next set of guidelines for the grants to be awarded in 2021 won't be out till August, September timeframe. However, the guidelines that were put out last fall for the grants that were just awarded, those are available. Most of us have them downloaded on our computers anyway, if they're not still on the EPA headquarters website. But they don't change those guidelines a lot from year to year. They just sort of tweak them and fine tune them. So if you want to know what the grant guidelines and requirements are for a proposal, you can look at the ones that came out last fall for the current grants that were just awarded, and what's going to be coming out for the next year for 2021 will be very close to the same thing. There won't be significant differences, just the usual annual tweaking. So if anybody wants to know what's in those proposal guidelines, what the requirements are for writing a proposal, beyond just what you see in the tab EZ, which is again based on last fall's guidelines, that gets updated each year also. They are available.
This is Terry again. Thanks, Mickey. That was actually something I meant to say and I forgot. So that's great. So they are still out on our website and you'll be able to find those. I typically just Google EPA Brownfields assessment grants and you'll get to the page that has the grant guidelines, and also for FY20, and those will be similar. And then also there's frequently asked questions, and there's some information on, there's a host of planning fact sheets that tell you what eligible activities are for planning that can be combined with assessment grants. So that's really nice and very helpful reading through those. Those are new this year. So I highly recommend you take a look at that. And just know that although they won't be different, they won't be substantially different each you start writing an application or assisting with an application, make sure that you highlight to the folks you're working with, the eligible entity, that they need to make sure they write specifically to the new guidelines. So because there are changes with criteria and sub-criteria sometimes added. So we like to keep things fresh and try to do continuous improvement, but hopefully not too much. So yeah, and feel free to reach out to Madison or myself or Mary or your EPA project manager and ask any questions. If you can't find something, just feel free to let us know and we'll help you track it down.
Thank you, Terry. Okay, do we have any other questions or clarifying comments? You can also put them in the chat or send them directly to me or Bailey if you want to remain anonymous. We could do that too, but this is a great opportunity to have any questions addressed. Maybe not even just about MARC grants, but about anything in the Brownfields world. Please feel free. We have our experts on the line.
Hi, everyone. This is Sir Scott here in Juneau. I'm with the Tlingit and Haida tribe, but I had just a general question. Just kind of seeking some expertise and some guidance. And maybe this isn't necessarily something that can happen in the realm of tribal response or brownfields, but our environmental department, they're currently looking at establishing a greenhouse. And I, for one, have no experience with any kind of, I have no green thumb at all. So I'm basically starting from scratch, our department. So I'm kind of looking to see if this is something that everything from like looking for a plot to start the greenhouse on, or what are ways of, I understand that we can look at like reutilizing sites for like community gardens or type of reuse type of projects, but I'm just looking for thoughts, I guess, or anything. But, and again, feel free, if it could be a very broad question to answer, but yeah, thank you.
I can answer that, Joy, if you want me to. This is Mickey.
Yes, please.
Anytime you want to do community gardens, greenhouse, those sort of things, you know, one of the first things you've got to consider, as you mentioned, is, well, where are you going to put it? And so selecting a site for, you know, facility like that, or even sites, and then figuring out which one to use, that can involve sites where there may have been past activity or past problems, and you may not even know. And that's where the assessment program comes in. It might be, you know, to consider just a routine practice that once you prioritize a site to do that sort of thing, or even a couple of sites, you need to decide which one to use. The assessment process could be a legitimate tool to make sure that that site is appropriate and safe for that kind of use, or if it has any issues and past activity, what it would do to make it safe. So that's where the Brownfield program comes in, is you know, evaluating sites to do that sort of thing.
Thank you, Mickey. I appreciate that. Really helps.
So this is Terry with EPA, and yeah, thanks, Mickey. That's it's really helpful. I think the idea, sir, that you're talking about of a greenhouse or community garden, that's a great way to reuse a brownfield property. And of course, you want to do your assessment and potential cleanup work first. And if you're, you know, as Mickey was mentioning, if you're looking to get an assessment done, that's something that you and the DEC for the brownfield assessment, or the DEC field assessment. So feel free to reach out. You know, it's, of course, if you have site-specific funds set up in your 128A budget, your STRP budget, you can, you know, talk to project offer about site eligibility and go that route as well. But we do have other services that can be called upon for just that purpose. So feel free to reach out if you have something that sounds like a great way to provide community fit of a brownfield.
Awesome. Thank you, Terry. Yeah, I'll definitely will be in touch with the project officer and all you guys.
Great. Sounds good.
Sir, I have one more resource for you. Maybe you can look into the EPA's Local Foods, Local Places grant. I know that one of the sites that were being assessed, the municipality of Anchorage, maybe it was 2 summers ago or last summer, looked and received that grant. And they're looking into putting an urban farm into downtown Anchorage. So maybe look into that, or I could send you a link for that.
That'd be great. Thank you, Joy. Yeah, I definitely would like to look into that.
Okay, Eric is on it. Thank you, Eric. Already put the link there in our chat. Okay, do we have any other comments or suggestions or questions? Okay. Well, thanks, sir, for your question. And it looks like we will maybe call it a day. Before we get off, I just want to highlight, if Scott can just kind of say hello. We want to just welcome Scott here. For those of you that haven't seen his face, maybe if you just say a quick hello, Scott, so your screen, you come up on our screen a bit bigger. But he's, as Mickey mentioned, one of the coordinators for Kansas State University's Tribal TAB.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be able to join you today. Looking forward to getting off of our travel restrictions so I can actually come to Alaska for my first time and do some face-to-face help with stuff. A couple of the resources mentioned today, the Tribal Brownfields Forum. Any general questions you have, you know, even things like the question about the local footage, you know, if you have questions that other tribal members might be able to help with, put it out there on the forum. You know, the more conversations we get going on that, the better it is for all of us. Thanks.
Thanks, Scott. And thanks for that reminder. So for all of you that are not a part of our Tribal Brownfields Forum, please, you could even just Google Tribal Brownfields Forum. It comes right up. Sign up for that. And there are discussion threads that you can read or post any type of questions on there. Please do so. We love seeing that benefit. And this is a forum for all TRPs throughout the United States. So it's a lot of action happening on there. And thank you, Bailey, for posting the link on the chat. So if we don't have any other questions or comments, we'll bid you all adieu. Thank you again to our speakers today, Mickey and Ignacio. And thank you, of course, to the EPA for letting this all happen. So thank you all for joining, and please feel free to follow up with any of us for any other questions. Well, take care of yourselves, and we hope to see you all soon.
Thanks, Joy.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.